Hey, good afternoon, and welcome back to the Future Proof podcast. Harry, and as always, with my partner Anthony. Going to
Yes,
try to,
I'm here.
how's everything? Good?
Good. I'm recording from a closet on the Warner Brothers lot in Burbank because my daughter's back from school and I occupy her room when she's out of town and as we rebuild our house. So this is a new spot for me.
I have all the space in the world. Me and a small French bulldog are the only inhabitants of my house currently. So, and he decided not to join me for this podcast. So,
Next time.
next time. Yeah. So as I'm sitting here, I am looking at a Claude screen, and what it says verbatim is Claude Fable 5 is currently unavailable. Why is it unavailable? 3 words: fix this code. That's what the people at Amazon typed in. It fixed the code. It did what it was supposed to do. It went off the rails.
Well, we could argue about that.
Yeah, well, it broke through its security guardrail and decided to review things for code security issues. And generally speaking, it would refuse if you told it to review the code, and it's fixed the code. It fixed it. So what happened last Friday night? Like a week ago Friday. This was 10 days ago, basically.
By the way, was that 10? Is that just 10 days ago, right?
It's actually 7 days. 7 days ago.
It feels like 20, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. So last Friday night, the U.S. pulled Fable 5 worldwide. Basically said you can't export this to anybody. You can't have anyone type into the box in the cloud service and use it. And, they turned the lights off on the thing, and it's still off. Karpathy, one of the smartest guys, one of the best known, well-liked, well-trusted guys in all of AI, said, this model's state of the art on everything by a large margin, a major version bump. It deserves a step change. There's now, it's now petitions out there saying free Alexei Karpathy. The crazy thing is that 48 hours later, China shipped a new model, and it's basically, like number one on all the benchmark tests, 1/10 of the cost. So, really interesting week still going on, obviously, because Claude Fable 5 is still currently unavailable. No end in sight for a variety of reasons that I think we'll go through. And I think so, let's go through, I think, what is a interesting 3-part story. I think number one is let's talk about what's going on with Anthropic and the Sand Hill standoff, or the Capitol Hill standoff, or whatever, however you want to put it,
or the Sad Hill standoff.
Sad Hill standoff, as we have in our little prompt here in front of us. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how we kind of run things, and I'm going to say that we will reiterate what we have in voice, what we have said in print over and over and over again, which is you got to own your own prompt and your own stack. And then we really want to dig in a little bit on the actual returns to AI, why they aren't coming yet, where they are coming, and where to look for them, really. Because I think we wrote some interesting pieces this week that are not necessarily news. I think they're more just thoughts on a bunch of stuff that we've been banging around. So with that, let's go back to Anthropic. Fable 5 still off the books here. Anthropic's been negotiating. They sent 2 of their people, Tom Brown and Sarah Heck, to D.C. to negotiate with Howard Lutnick. They say that they're progressing, but, hey, there's no fix, there's no timetable, the model's still dark. This is really the first time that export controls have actually reached the usage of a cloud model, not just the code. It's not just you can't use the code, it's you can't actually use the system. So that assumption that you had in the past is just gone. And I think when you think about this, and you give me your opinion, I'll give you mine. This is something that is it's sort of shocking, actually, that you have a great model, you have your $8 billion investor rat you out for a jailbreak of that model. The model goes off the line.
Yeah, we should explain that. Not many people that might be listening to our podcast has read all the news, but
right. So Amazon's an investor, and $8 billion into Anthropic, and Amazon is the one that brought it to the attention of the U.S. government that the controls that they put on Mythos to allow it to be put out into the market under the name Fable 5 were breached effectively, that it went off the rails. And the interesting thing is how it went off. It wasn't an issue of they ran some sort of crazy system. They basically put in a bunch of broken code and said, can you please review this code? And it said, no, I can't do that. I'm programmed not to do that. And then they said, could you fix this code? They were complimentary. They were saying, please help me. I need help. Fix the code, please. And it fixed the code. It was trying to be helpful. It didn't know that it could, that it sort of had the right to remain silent. We wrote a piece, The Right to Remain Silent, this week. And that's a problem. You were able to get around it. They brought it to the attention of the U.S. government. The U.S. government asked,
but they could have brought it to Amazon. Amazon could have brought it to
directly to Anthropic. Yes.
So
well, I think they.
That's the thing.
I think we could debate it. I think they probably did bring it to Anthropic, and Anthropic said, "This is not a problem. This is not a jailbreak. This is not a problem."
Let's try both of those arguments. Let's say they did it. They brought it to Anthropic, and they're like, "That's a feature, not a bug." Why is Amazon taking anything to the government? Like, what did it really do that was wrong? Who's Amazon to say this is wrong?
I don't. I have no idea why Amazon would have taken it to the government. I really don't, because Amazon's an investor. Anthropic's models are on Amazon's cloud system. They have nothing to benefit except that they know that the government has had it out for Anthropic a little bit. Remember, a couple months ago, the Pentagon wanted to use Claude's models. Claude told them to pound sand, that they weren't going to give them the sort of unlimited use that they wanted in it. And as a result of that, they said, we're going to label, basically label you I forget what the exact label was, but they're going to, they were going to label them so that they couldn't be used by anyone in the government. So Anthropic's, kind of said no to the government before.
Yeah, they were labeled a security risk, like a national security risk.
Yeah, and so it could be that Amazon, which has plenty of government business, I mean a ton of government business, looks at this and politically says, all right, we took it to Dario. Dario told us to pound sand. Same thing as he's told everybody. So we have too much government business. We have too much to lose if the government gets pissed at us for finding this and never coming to the government and telling us.
Well, that would be a logical reason.
So
be a logical reason.
Yeah. So we'll go. I mean, this is the, look, it's sort of the, I wrote in a piece this week, I said, cui bono, who benefits from this? Well, OpenAI benefits, obviously. I mean, Anthropic's about to go public. All of a sudden, their flagship model is dark in the middle of their roadshow. Codex becomes the default for a number of people. Amazon, I'm going to say, might benefit because of the seen as being a good player, a good partner to the government. They also don't need Anthropic to win. They just need it embedded in their own system, and they become kind of the security auditor of record, and that looks good for them. Elon certainly wins. The frontier race slows down. Grok's positioning all of a sudden, gets better. They buy Cursor this week. They rename Cursor as, as I forget what they're calling it. It's like, Grok builds or something like that.
I know. That's an amazing story in itself. I know we're on the Anthropic thing, but what a phenomenal move on Elon, and it's
and he went public. He ran the stock up. He paid with stock that was up over $200, and the day the deal closed, the stock dropped $25. He basically paid for all of Cursor by putting out a couple tweets on X, effectively. Pretty, the gains there were pretty good. It was impressive. Anyway, to get back,
but everyone's like, I think here, like, part of me that's here is like, it seems like Anthropic jumped out in front of everyone, kicked everyone's ass in the model business, and sort of won the hearts and minds of a lot of developers, and everyone's going after them. You got the U.S. government saying you can't use your best model, which just slows everything down, demoralizes the team. You got Grok buying Cursor, who's going to go after the coding business, and with the Cursor team and Elon's stuff, they quite honestly could become number one or two over. So everyone's after Anthropic, like they're the leader. So everyone's smashing them, we're still. I mean, look, I still use Claude every day. I know you do. I use Google every day, and I've been using Gemma 4.1 on my desktop.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, it's going to be Anthropic's going to have to take some lumps here.
Yeah. And again, we can get into it deeper if you want, but at the end of the day, my use of Anthropic to help run our business here, I use Opus 4.8. I used Fable for 5 days. Like, do I see a major difference? Not really.
Yeah. I mean, you were traveling, so we didn't really have a bunch of sit down time with it because it came and went so fast.
But
you could see the glimpses that it was pretty bitchin'. Way too expensive, I think. You know what I mean?
yeah,
For the
but
average person.
but at the end of the day here, like, I think if you were Stripe and you were going to refactor 5 million lines of code, or was it 50 million lines of code, whatever it was, they refactored all of their code in 45 minutes.
I mean,
That's unbelievable, right? That's something that Stripe said would have taken their whole engineering team 2 months to do, and they did it in 45 minutes. So
I mean,
so that's an
yeah.
enormous savings, and, like, whatever the token cost was, it was cheaper than their engineering team for 2 monts. I guarantee you that.
And
So
no one likes refactoring work. That's like
no,
maintenance work.
yeah, and so if it can do that, it's
So,
great. If you're gonna use it to help write newsletters and make pictures and things like that, it doesn't really matter whether that model's on or off. I really think it matters to a very small number of people who are coders who can really use the horsepower of it. But look,
yeah, I mean, there was
to some degree, these guys, I mean, you hate to say it, but, like, to some degree, they brought it on themselves. I mean, you wrote a great look. I'm an enormous Lord of the Rings fan, as you probably know. I've read the books like 20 plus times. So, when you put out a piece with, a picture of Treebeard, Fangorn, on the masthead, so to speak, that certainly caught my eye. So
I didn't warn you about it either. You just
no,
saw it.
no, I caught it and I was just like, hey, wow, that's cool. So why don't you go through that, which is to say, hey, he asked for it, he got it. So, you wrote it. So
I mean,
you talk about it.
I read the piece, right? I mean, I read Dario's piece, which was pretty dense, and he actually made the reference to, like, the government moves really slow and AI moves very fast, and so. And he was asking the government, it's time to start taking regulation very serious. The models are getting this place, and we're going to get to this, like, place where the models could start doing some could start scaling itself, meaning it could start doing it could get to this next,
Yeah.
like, and he was
Recursive improvement.
recursive improvement, which inside that lab they must already be doing it, and so they see something that's pretty. And so he wrote a piece called Policy, I think, on AI exponential. And so I just read it and thought about it and rewrote what I thought I heard. And he literally wants to be regulated. So now the government, I think, in just like its own sort of, method, said, fine, let's regulate you.
Right. We're going to start with you.
We're going to start with you, and we're going to shut you down. Although it's not really a shutdown. It's like you just can't use it. But I think the downside of that is the government isn't Treebeard. It moved lightning fast. That literally, the article was published on the 12th or the 11th, and they were shut down like days later. So the actual, it's not true. The government's moving quite fast for a government.
If you remember the Lord of the Rings, the Ents were he described them as very slow to move after his long Ent moot.
Yeah.
But once they get angered and going, you don't want to be in their way. And then the government is a little like that. It's it's kind of like a battleship or a aircraft carrier, oil tanker.
I mean, you had a lawsuit.
You
had a lawsuit with the government. How long did it take you to solve? It took you 11 years?
15 years.
15
years. Yeah. So yeah, no, it's look, when the government wants to move fast, it will move fast, and it moves with with an iron hammer. I mean, you don't want to be on the wrong side of the US government. Period.
No, what I also wrote in the piece was, like, when you're calling for regulation, if you curry favor with the government, you can kind of drive the regulations where you would be not regulated because you're writing the regulations and you're currying favor with the government, and they have no regulators, and you would end up kind of getting what is being called regulatory capture. By being the friend of the government, you write all the rules, and you write them just to the point where no one else can join the party. And I don't know. I don't know if regulatory capture is working right now, because they're the ones, Anthropic's on the wrong side of that regulatory capture right now.
Yes, they certainly are. But look, again, there is some sort of game theory being played out here. You cannot tell me that Anthropic can't fix the problem. They
don't want to. Right.
They don't want
to.
They don't want to for some reason. Whether that's because he wants to, I'm going to say Dario wants to. Dario and his board, or Dario and his sister, or whoever they're really, we'll just make him the figurehead, right? Because at the end of the day, I believe that he feels that he's on the right side of this, and that he's not just going to give in for the sake of business, because he answers to a higher calling effectively, which is a public benefit corporation, which is a effective altruistic, viewpoint on life. And that,
Yeah.
quite frankly, the Trump administration is here now, but Anthropic will outlast the Trump administration. And therefore, is there any reason why he needs to change his business model today, or change
Probably
his
not.
morals today, or change his, his viewpoint today, when you have an election coming up in November where, quite frankly, the existing government could, splinter quite a bit and become a lame duck. And, while he could still be regulated, the end, there'll be a countdown on that, and he can do just fine, with Opus 4.8 and whatever comes thereafter. So, and quite frankly, the Chinese are making the case for him, right? I mean, the U.S. The U.S.
Yeah.
government, Trump does not want to see Chinese models lead the world in AI. And if we have a better model and the government says you can't use it, and the Chinese keep pushing out better and better models in open source, well, sooner or later you're going to say, well, maybe we should rethink this. And I'm sure he's
Yeah.
counting on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, he got regulated. Government's moving faster than I think he anticipated. He's jammed up. Amazon did what they do, but I would actually just, for some people, before we move on to the next segment, I think there's a guy a lot of people follow that are sort of a little deeper in the weeds of how AI is working. There's a guy named Pliny the Liberator. I don't know if you've heard. Have you heard of him, Harry?
I have. Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. But he posted, on June 10th, like jailbreaks, like far more like jailbreaks are far more like a researcher would jailbreak than what Amazon did. I think that Dario asked to be regulated, and I think the government's making an example of him. And I think that's going to affect, I think, his business model. I think it erodes trust with business people, where they're like, I'm putting my stuff all on this guy's platform, and then out of nowhere, no warning, nothing, it's all gone. Not that anyone had enough time to move to Fable, but it's kind of like, if you're playing with the government in a way that they could just mess with you, you're not going to necessarily build your stack. So to sort of transition out, the fire drill told you that you are renting, right? So you're renting inference.
You're renting intelligence. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
From whoever.
Yeah. Yeah, from whoever. And you don't need to. You might want to, but you don't need to. You could get your team running on Glam 5.2 or DeepSeek or even Google's Gemma. I mean, there are open source models that you could probably use depending on your use case. Like if you're summarizing, or you're doing like like you're looking for trends in data, these are all very good and probably good enough for what you're doing. And that would actually lower your overall costs significantly. And more importantly, we always say, you're checking code into Git is still sort of a common practice, but really checking your MD files, like what the recipe that's making the software, is more important. So the markdown files, the instructions, that's really like, if all your prompts and all your sort of like skills are locked up in a single browser, in a single vendor, and they go dark for any reason, like you've really lost your intelligence.
Yes.
So we're advocating companies to think, no, you want to keep how you're instructing your AI really close on your computer systems, and all the learnings, the memory, all that is, if you have to use a cloud-based one, you should save that locally. And because if they go dark, you need that, and you won't have it. If you had a bunch of stuff for example, if you had a lot of prompts inside of Fable right now, and a lot of skills inside of Fable, you're done. You're cooked.
Yeah,
so
it's interesting. I know we run this together, but we run sort of separate systems. We don't use a common system. And I use more Claude Code, and I use more Claude Cowork, and I have everything on a drive, right? It's just it's saved. It's saved, on a cloud drive. And so, if Anthropic ceased to exist tomorrow, I would shed a tear for about 4 seconds, and I would move straight to Google, or move straight to ChatGPT, and I would just run a test and see which one I like to work with better, because everything that I need to produce articles on a daily basis, to assess our large flow of information that we get and then ultimately extract from and write from. It all exists outside of Anthropic. As a matter of fact, pretty much nothing exists within Anthropic. Now we can do that, I think, to a large degree because we have in general a small amount of stuff that's going in there. As you get to corporations, you're going to have to do it as a sort of a unified platform across your company, and you're going to have more people access it, and you're going to have to, you're probably going to get a little bit more complicated, and therefore you're going to maybe potentially overwhelm the context window, as you start loading things in every time you want to work, and it may slow things down. But my guess is that's
Well, that's
limited
where
to
the harness, that's where
Yeah.
your wrapper around it
Yeah.
is managed, I think. And that's where we look, it's right now, we're talking about owning your prompts and owning your stack. And that's a tall order for companies that are just looking at like, how do I get started with AI? Or how do I automate stuff and read my email? It's like, listen, you're doing what everyone does. You choose one of the vendors and you start working inside that vendor's space. And you are fairly captured at that point by that vendor. And as you get get maybe past 18 months of doing that, you're going to want to start migrating that intelligence that you've learned to operate your business with into something that you can save and control on your desktop or your on-prem servers.
I'd argue that you want to do that a lot earlier because
You do, but I
the
think the
deeper you
learning
go, the harder it
Yeah.
is to move.
It is. But a lot of people, they like, if they're not planning properly, I think they'll end up there longer. I think if they're planning where they're saying like, we're just going to fool around here for a little while, and as we find out, we're going to start migrating stuff into something that we can write and manage and locally. And I think then the memory, the skills, the prompts, the way that you interact with the intelligence vendor, you'll start treating that with a lot more authority. But you usually start inside the model vendor.
So you would actually
And
be
for
a
the model,
proponent
so the way
of
we
FAFO, fool around and
huh?
find out. I said you'd
Yeah,
be a
full round.
proponent of FAFO, fool around and find out
Yeah,
in this case.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we advocate experiment, but quickly find out this is what's going to work. And then what you do is you really write some durable software that you own and operate, and you communicate with the intelligence platform via API, and you manage that conversation in a way that's the smartest and most beneficial for your company, because that company could be regulated just like Anthropic got regulated. This regulation, I think, is not going to stop. It's actually going to probably be sort of present as a way the government can kind of manage these companies.
Although the government tried to do this with cryptography in the past,
Yeah,
and
they did it with the RSA. That was a really big deal. They've done it with Apple too, where like we need a backdoor.
yeah, and they've said no, and Britain said we need a backdoor, and they've said no, and they said we'd rather close our British business than give you the backdoor, and then the government backed down. And I think that's it's sort of interesting as these companies become kind of super national. They're kind of above the sovereign laws in some cases of many of these countries, because from a business standpoint, they don't, like if Apple has to shut the UK, it's like they make $110 billion instead of $112 billion. It's like, whatever, who cares? Like it's not going to kill us. So we'd rather do that and keep everything safe. Open source is good. I mean, the products are good. They will keep getting better. And right now they're all coming out of China, but I think over time they'll come from all over the world, probably not Europe, because they do have too many regulations for anyone to actually build anything over there.
Well, they have the Mistral from France, but I don't know if that's really gonna be, like a challenge.
I think that's a wrapper on Windows 4, isn't it? Like,
But with total honesty, I think that like China really is doing a great job. Their DeepSeek models, their seed dance with all the transformers that they're doing in with graphics. I think they're state of the art, and I think that they require they're not as clean as like Anthropic and OpenAI, but they're quite formidable.
formidable,
And
as they say in Les Mistral.
yeah. But I think the IT story here is IT's generally very comfortable in sort of identifying open source software that they can get behind and start writing, wrapping, or using. And I think that we're in 2026 moving forward. think there's going to be a lot of open source teams, sorry, IT teams that are going to be able to like understand where these open source models are shine and start really using them. And it will actually, I think, on the long run, actually impact the public markets with these intelligence companies, because the intelligence companies that are running at that scale have a significant power and cost infrastructure to manage. And if you're a small if you're a small company and you just you could you can run it on prem with
Yes.
like maybe a $10,000 or $20,000 investment, and you still have your IT manage it and still get what you probably need to get done. But if you need to go, like if you're becoming an an AI company, AI first company with a front door that's AI, you're probably not going to run that all on open source on-prem services. You'll probably have to do a mixture of things to achieve the product you want. And I think the story is that most CEOs and management teams just don't know that there is a mixture of things.
Right.
So they
I
end up
think that's
leveraged into one.
right. I think that's ultimately where we end up going with all of this. And quite frankly, the early days, setting up any of these sort of open source models, et cetera, or even setting up, with the frontier models in the US, it's kind of like where you were 20, 30 years ago, where it was like, hey, I need a website. How do I get a website up and running? How do I get myself online? And there was a whole cottage industry of people that got you online before, had Wix and all these
Yeah, I mean,
places where, well, now,
I was in that.
now we can all do it. I think there was, look, I think there were some interesting quotes, that
Yeah.
we saw, Isaac said, any application depending on US-based LLMs is subject to being shut down at any moment, and there was no forewarning. I would comment that, if you're running a Chinese model, they would be subject to shutdown as well. I think
Yeah.
any of these
But
models are
they're
subject to
local.
shutdown.
Yeah.
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 Carney from Canada said, U.S. restrictions underscore the risk of dependence. I don't see a model out of Canada, so that doesn't have the same dependence. So the guy who runs Every, Dan Shipper, who we like what they do a lot. We read it, like it. He basically went from using Claude to Codex in a single afternoon and didn't miss a beat. So if you know what you're doing, you can move everything over really quickly. If you don't, you're gonna have a harder time. So I think you just have to know effectively what you're dependent on, how much you're dependent upon it, and if it disappears on you, you gotta be able to move on. I'll give you an example. Last night I got home and I was going to work. I was going to write, which I did. I wrote, but I was going to put the Equalizer 3 movie on, with Denzel Washington. He's, off whacking various bad guys. And it's on Hulu, which is on Disney. And Disney, Disney Plus was just SOL last night. It was just offline. You couldn't log in, and I forget I forget the site, but Downtime Detector, I think it's called. That tells you, which sites are down. And, of course, Disney was like, it was the headline and it was just down for the whole time I was going to watch. I was like, all right, moving on, just
Moving on.
put,
Yeah.
yeah, just, you just move on. It's not a big deal. But if it's your whole workflow and there's no moving on because you don't have all your because you don't have all your files ready to input to something else, there's no moving on, then you're just waiting. And if it happens
like
to
if
be
it's your customer, if it's your customer care triage system, moving on is time. So what Dan Shipper was saying is he switched from like one to the other is probably because he has the router already built in. Do you know what I mean?
yes.
So it's like that. The question is, are the executive teams able to ask the why? Like, why are we dependent? And then if do we need to be? And I think the answer is you don't need to be, and you need to design effectively so that you're not stuck.
Yeah. Well, good. Look, I think we've beaten that one, and we've solved the model problem and all that stuff. And so I think that the bigger question that I think we wanted to get to, which probably will take up the back half of this conversation, is, and it seems to be a big one these days, is where's the ROI on this? Why isn't anyone making money? Who's making money? Why isn't everybody making money if AI was going to revolutionize the world? And how do we kind of get back and get there? So let's just start with a quote from a Databricks exec in one of their sessions this week. They had a big corporate session, and they basically said, last year the executives were letting every flower bloom. Now they're coming in with a lawnmower. Someone else said, Gozi said the spend is, quote, completely unsustainable. So two, kind of interesting
Well,
things, right?
but
It's like,
if you think about that, if you're talking about making money, it's like it's unsustainable because we're spending so much money. So someone's making money is the money's leaving that company and going to another company, right?
right.
So the intelligence companies are making real money, and the hyperscalers are making real money, and the power companies are making real money.
Right.
So
So
the
let's
ROI question is like,
yeah. So let's go.
are
I mean,
you making
let's
money?
yeah, right. So let's just start with that, right? The money is real, right? And it is going to people. So, Databricks, where we started here, almost a $7 billion ARR. It's up 80%.
They're making
They
money.
they fight with Snowflake, and their ARR is up like $1.5 billion more than Snowflake. So Snowflake is not exactly suffering. They're down there at only 5.4 billion dollar ARR. I weep for the people who
Yeah.
work and own that stock. But this is we very much like the writings of Thomas Tungus, and he sort of coined a saying that a lot of these companies are the first derivative of inference. They sit in the token path and they just clip a fee. And those guys are doing fantastic, right? So the question, is, and I think, you have some thoughts on this, give me a couple of reasons why the ROI doesn't show at your company, like at your company being XYZ company.
I mean, like, I always think that it's too early to judge. You know what I mean? Like, if you're a company that's just adopted, like, hey, you're going to try to like augment the system and reduce, customer care executives or team, it probably takes 18 to 20 months to really kind of get that fully articulated, at a corporation. So I don't really know where all this analysis is coming from. Do you know what I mean? Or is it like, how long have they been running this? We had an MIT report like 2 years ago where like no one's showing any results. And I'm just kind of like, I don't know, just in your own world, doesn't AI help you in your own specific workspace alone? Like, if you're working at a company and you were asked to like, hey, you need to like work on a merchandising plan for your small company, AI is going to help you immediately help you work through that versus you having to hire or tie up new teams. So I don't know how they're really measuring the ROI. I think they're measuring it at a very macro level, and they're unable to like really find the micro. But I would say it's just too early. Like, the early companies that were adopting the internet, which is like, hey, I'm just building a website for my company. The same writers would be like, hey, what's your ROI on your new website that you just spent a lot of money on building? And they'd be like, none. It's too early.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I think, but I do think that
That's what I answer when people ask what's our revenue model, and I say, we're
exactly, it's
just,
too early.
it's too early. We're building content. We're building
It's too early.
authority. We're
Yeah.
hopefully
We-
making,
yeah.
amusing people. We're going to talk
Which
about
is
Pliny
which
the
is
Elder later on,
Yeah, it's which is a real business objective. But I think that you made me lose my train of thought. But I think it's really too early to judge real ROI on companies. But there are some companies that have real ROI, and clearly it's a real nice headline to say all these things. But I do think that the getting back to the Databricks quote, letting the flowers bloom was probably the right thing. Coming with a lawnmower is also probably the right thing. Meaning, hey, like what's working, what's not working, and let's tighten it up. Because we spent a lot of money. It's tuition. Everyone got to learn a lot of stuff, but let's tighten it up so that we can really make this work. And I think that all these people that are writing these headlines, their business is to write alarming headlines so that you click on it and read. And I think the problem with this is that you end up getting a lot of bad signal in the space where someone who hasn't really gone ahead and started thinking about making AI work for their business, they don't get started because they read these headlines, which are ridiculous.
right? Yeah, of course, and we can talk a little bit about about some of the other news that we saw this week, particularly Midjourney's scanner, in terms of headlines. Just like on one side, just it's going to change the world, and on the other side, this isn't going to work. Sort of thing. It's pretty interesting. But I think some of the things that show up is also that people don't know exactly what they want from AI, and as a result, you gotta work over some of the stuff. Like it's not like it's going to come out perfect the first time. You have to really work at getting the inputs and outputs that you want exactly right, because it is a machine. It does what you tell it to do for the
Yeah.
most part, and if you don't tell it to do exactly what you need, you're going to have to do the work over again. And as a result, you don't get everything into production. The other thing, and I think it really goes back to our sort of second, hit here in the podcast is, with all the harnesses and the models and everything, which is that people tend to use the most expensive tool to do the simplest work. And that is to say, if you're using Fable 5 to write a newsletter, you're effectively, we don't run out of credits because we spend the $200 and we sort of haven't run out yet because we're not doing anything.
Yeah, we're not there.
We're not there. But there are lots of people who are running code and doing things like that where they're using an incredibly expensive model to, it's sort of like buying a Ferrari and using it to go 2 miles to go to the grocery store and back. It's sort of like it's sort of a waste. You should have
which
an
is
open
fun.
source model.
It's fun to drive the Ferrari to the market.
It is until you
have
until you have 4 bags and you can't put them in the car.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, and you can only go 20 miles an hour on the local roads.
Yeah, you can only go 12 miles an hour. Yeah.
But at any rate, it's sort of, the idea is, cutting a daisy with a chainsaw, right? You're using a tool that's too powerful for it. And as a result, you're spending too much money effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a pattern that I follow is I use Claude Code and I use Haiku, which is a very lightweight, fast model. It does the job a lot. And I'd love to know what Haiku is related to the the open source models, because I use it all the time. But I use this advisor pattern where it's like, hey, the fallback is use 4.8 to advise. So my tokens just internally are just not like, I'm disciplined.
Yes.
So
but you're probably one of the few, the few that are. Look, I think where we are, quite frankly, is just we're in a world where all of this is so new that someone like yourself who has been in tech for 40 years,
long time,
whatever,
yep.
you've seen all of modern technology and you know how to program and you're, effectively an engineer. And there are lots of engineers who do this, for a living and have done it for a living. And so like all of that stuff is second nature to them. It just comes naturally, right? And then you have literally everybody else in the world. So you have this small subset of people for whom all of that is easy, simple, and they can do it right away. And then you have literally everybody else who's sitting there going, okay, I just used whatever model loaded into, my Claude interface. Well, it was the most expensive model. Well, that's what I ran. Okay. Why did I run out of tokens? I redesigned my website 45 times, like.
Yeah. The dumbest thing I see is like people using the API, and the API is on the usage basis, and they don't know what they're doing, and they'll just waste thousands of dollars worth of tokens, and they also might not even know that how much they're spending. So like it's really easy for a company to say, hey, I'm going to get all my developers on this thing, I'm going to give them API access, they're new to it, they don't know what they're spending, and you're suddenly get a Claude bill that each developer is spending $6,000 or $7,000 a month in tokens. You're just like, what? That's dumb. So I think there's a way to get discipline around that, and that happens. And that, by the way, but that also happened in the internet age when you started hosting stuff, and you're like, oh my God, my CDN bill just tripled. Why?
Right.
We have a viral hit. It's like, your viral hit is just, so these things, like, a bit older, mature business person will understand this. But when you see Gartner talking about like half the companies that replace service teams with AI expected to rehire by 2027, I think that was that was a business that might have been coming from the MBA office saying, hey, let's try to eliminate our headcount and use AI. And really, it was really, that's not the right path. The right path is invert that. It's like, let's try to automate and augment our current team. And as we perfect it, we will literally see what headcount we need. And what's interesting, and I'll just make a note here, what I think is interesting, human talent to think about hiring at your company, is someone that might have come from a project management or product management team that actually had to automate factories. Because the same problem happens with factories when you bring in robots. No one knows how to use them. You completely overspend. Everything's foobar for a while until suddenly, boom, they all start working. But down the line, your ROI story smelled like a turd until it didn't. And I think that those guys will really be able to like offer CEO and executives. It's like, no, this is going to be bumpy. They're not going to work. We're going to have second order effect problems, like it's too hot in the room, or et cetera, that you can't get humans around them, et cetera, et cetera. But once you get it fully automated and running, it is like, you're not building, Teslas or Toyotas without them. And so talk talk to those guys and find out the ROI on automation and using machines to build.
Yeah,
Because that's what we're doing with AI.
Yeah, long term, you're going to have machines building more machines. The Teslas are going to be built by robots, and they're going to roll off, and they're going to use full safe self drive to go park themselves in the parking lot, and then they're going to drive themselves to their end customer. That you're going to buy it online, and it's going to roll into your driveway.
Yeah, you're literally they're gonna self-market themselves to you and sell it. So, which I don't see a problem with. You know what I mean?
No,
I don't. I don't.
Yeah.
There was a kind of a question that you addressed, which was like one of the dumbest things I see in business with AI spend right now, which I think I answered. It's like sort of you don't have a taxi meter on your tokens.
Right.
But I also just see that I think journalism is in part the reason why we wanted to start Co-AI was we actually thought that journalists were actually going to write these dumb stories that were like, because they're headline driven and they're going to offer a lot of noise and skepticism. And I think there's good reason for great case studies on what went right and what went wrong. But I think the problem with some of these, this is the Gartner loop of like, disillusionment. You're going to get a lot of companies that are going to read that and not start modernizing their businesses, which could cost them more by not sort of participating and getting more modern, and that's a risk. So there's a lot of ways to get involved without having to have a crazy ROI story. You can have a micro ROI story and keep building and keep compounding on that until it becomes a whopper of an ROI story.
Yeah. It's funny. We as we were writing this week and as looking at articles and really kind of contemplating this question of like, where's the ROI? And why is there such a quick uptake in coding, and why is there, not necessarily as quick an uptake in other places? We ended up writing 2 pieces. And they're not pieces that went on our newsletter every day. They're pieces that we just put up as blog posts. They're effectively just they're in our essay section. So which job gets us 1000x next and the aligned agent. Those were the 2 pieces, and they're up on our website. And take a look at them if you're interested.
You should take a look at them. Yeah.
I think you should, but I'm horribly biased as the author of these things. But I started to think about like why some of these things happened and where the opportunities were and what comes next. And I think where I got to was that coding got its sort of multiplier effect first because it literally has the tightest feedback loop. You can automate something, you can test it, and it either works or it doesn't work. And if it works,
binary.
Yeah, it's just completely binary, and it's all digital, and you just don't have to wait. You can run 1,000 tests before noon, and as it works, it works. You look at legal fields, medicine, strategy sessions, McKinsey's of the world. There's literally no test. So Harvey, and Legora, and I forget what the other one was that hired Jude Law over in the UK, but. Which I like the ad for anyway. They started at the administrative level, which is the really, I'd say, gradable slice of what is effectively, and you can't grade the profession, and started there. They basically said, we're going to take work that took, 2 weeks of a paralegal, and we're just going to do it in 10 minutes. So it's more actually just pure LLM work than it is actually legal work. It's administrative work. It's not the actual, legal stuff. And so it's really, if you think about the kind of the meta skill that you're talking about, it's turning unverifiable work into verifiable work. And what's interesting to me then became, and as I started to think about it, I started to really sort of go deeper into that. And I'm like, why do I see on my X feed just a constant, kind of the hustle bro culture of send me a DM and I'll send you my way to make money in Polymarket. I'll send you my way to make money in Kalshi. I'll send you my way of making money on a way to automate all of your marketing and stuff like that. And all of these things are really fast loop domains. That's the key is right. You can,
and they're digital.
Yeah, they're digital and they're fast loop, right? So the blank spaces are all over the place, though. And the problem, though, is that you can actually say, okay, I have the answer right. I can verify it. Let me tell you what looks good, and I'm going to then confidently verify it. And then you get things like long-term capital management, where an edge case takes you down, or you get things like Watson, Watson Medical, which was supposed to revolutionize medicine. And ultimately, they sold it off for parts because IBM literally couldn't make it work because at the end of the day, the case studies were just wrong. And I sort of I stopped there one day because I sort of, the piece was long enough, but then I immediately went into it and I said, but there's more to it than just that. If you really want to make money using AI, it's obviously it's not these crowded fast loop fields, right? Because I'm going to say that's just capitalism at AI speed. The whole premise of capitalism is you find something, it's profitable, people copy you, and they compete away your advantage to the point where you have none. And the marginal cost of doing something is the marginal profit that you make, and it sort of competes the profit out of it. So it's not those fields. You really want things that are high stakes but slow. You don't want high stakes and fast, like high frequency trading. That's high stakes and really fast. You don't want coding, high stakes and fast. You want high stakes but really slow to verify. And
Or yeah,
and
yeah.
and and it really matters who your middleman is, like who the agent is on one of these sides.
Yes.
You want to have your AI really aligned, because at the end of the day, a lot of the opportunities using AI are because the incumbents in these businesses that everyone looks at, they can't actually fix the problem, right? Like, why couldn't Zillow do this? Well, Zillow couldn't do it because at the end of the day, they're making all their money from the real estate agents, and the real estate agents are not aligned with the actual sellers of homes, right? You want to sell your house for $1.5 million. Is there any reason why Zillow, why an agent is going to hold out for $1.6 million if they get $1.5 million bid? There's no chance they're going to hold out. They're going to say, I get 5% of $1.5 million. Why do I care? I get 5% of the extra $100,000. So I make 5,000 more. I may screw up my 75,000. The risk reward is all wrong for me. Close the deal. Whereas you, as the homeowner with a mortgage,
Yeah,
are
you
sitting
want the
there
extra
going,
100 grand.
that extra $100,000 could be like an extra 20% return on my equity. So, you really want to do it. And what I came up with ultimately is that you want to use AI to create a durable moat around whatever it is that you're doing with the AI. And it's really it's a complete view of a marketplace. It's a complete view of your business. So if you're thinking about high frequency trading, like, you would think that there should be no profits in that. And yet, Citadel and Jane Street would argue heavily otherwise, from their yachts and private planes, right? I mean, these guys are absolutely tonning it yearly. And why are they doing that? Because they have all the order flow. And because they can see the order flow, they have information that no one else has. And therefore, they can do high frequency trading in a way that no one else can. Same thing with Amazon. You go to buy towels, bed sheets, whatever. Amazon can look at that and go, it looks like a pretty good business. We should get into that. And we can promote
Yeah, they
our own
do.
stuff.
They do.
And nobody has enough market power where if they pull their product off, it matters. And so what happens? Amazon goes and does it and makes a little money. Or they say, we're going to do this unless you spend a little bit more money promoting and
Yeah,
advertising.
exactly.
And I'll just take the same margin, but I'll do it without having to do any work. I'll do it as a digital advertising business as opposed to an actual towel business, in which case, they're
But that's the
better.
distribution. That goes back to our thesis that businesses need to think about their distribution.
Right. That's exactly right.
And
So at the end of the day, that's sort of the punchline of all this, is that distribution matters. You need to sort of build this aligned agent to get your foot in the door, and then you want to convert it into distribution, a structural position before
yes.
the loop gets closed and it sort of buries you.
I mean, in distribution's hard to get and hard to disrupt.
Yes, it's very hard, right? So, it's sort of like, when I go back and think about the real estate thing, I mean, Steve Levitt from Freakonomics, said agents sell their homes for 3% more than they do for their clients, and they leave them on the market something like 30 to 60 days longer because they wait, because they know that they can get more money from it. They don't do that. The agent's model is, Alec Baldwin, Glengarry Glen Ross, always be closing. A always B, B, C, closing, AIDA, attention. Do I have your attention?
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. So,
Attention's like, we agree there. And I mean, your analysis is like, you are an analyst, so you actually are spot on there. I kind of go back to your original premise on your 1000x and in the computer, like AI solving engineer software development so fast, or it's early. I mean, the early adoption's there because, the programmers are on the keyboard, they're seeing it, they could verify it, and like, why not? But let's, like, if you look at the U.S. Bureau of they have the number of about really dedicated. The statistics is about 300,000 dedicated computer programmers in the U.S. It's not a big
So
number,
no,
right? And then
0.1% of the population.
yeah, and then if you add in the hobbyists, you kind of bump up, so it's about 152, right? Let's say 2%. So and every product that's actually happening in the world that matters is digital. It has either is digital in delivery, or it's digital marketed and distributed. And
Unless, of course, it's a Trader Joe's tote bag. Things
exactly.
are selling like
That's yeah.
hotcakes. Yeah.
I know. I see the lines. I'm in California. So, but if you think about it, if someone comes in and says, "Hey, you can use this magic tool and you too can make code work," that's literally gonna say, "Hey, the other 96% people need that in the US." So you're gonna have a huge uptick on usage of these AI models. It's providing something that is sorely needed. And so when I look at like where you look, I liked your thing like fast and what you were talking about. I think the niching down and looking at what things are moving slowly and that are not going to get any attention are going to actually be ones that are going to show real high ROI. No one wants to go in the market. The TAM's not big enough for VCs. It moves too slow, etc. I mean, Zillow attacked. We're on real estate. Zillow attacked the multi-listing service business. They had all the photos. They had a map. They didn't do shit with it. Zillow comes in and says, we'll take that data and make a better map and just make it modern. And those are juggernauts in the real estate business. Like you, as a real estate broker, you can't live without the Zillow. And as a buyer, you can't live without it. As a buyer, you use Zillow all the time.
Right.
And so, but it existed.
And the crazy thing about Zillow is rather than sit there and say, you know what, we should create our own Zillow real estate agents in every one of these markets. And we should do that in competition with the guys who are doing this and say, how many sales do we need to make at $1 million to offset the advertising revenue? And let's actually change the way that we do commissions rather than just charge a flat 5% for doing absolutely nothing. Let's make it so that we're aligned all of a sudden.
But I have a real estate agent. I have a real estate agent in my family, and I'll tell you the amount of work an agent goes through to like help get a property to sell or to buy there's just a ton of shit. And Zillow doesn't do any of that. So the robots buy sell is harder than you think. Firsthand.
So what they did was they decided, we have more data, we're smarter, let's just go into the business of flipping houses ourselves. And then they ended up taking a $500 million write-down, doing it because they had to shut that thing down.
Yeah. It's a crazy. Weird, after being around it closely, it's a unique business. I think the augmentation that Zillow has done to the industry has really helped buyer and seller. But I think but I think what you were saying, the distribution and like using AI, as what you were saying, like you have to look at the whole space, the gestalt of it, and then decide, I think is the right thing to do. And I don't know if a lot of business people are able to do that. Do you know what I mean? Understand what this new modern software can do. And I think that's what we do with our advisory. It's like, what is your core business, and can AI really actually improve it? And that just can't, the McKinsey guys are experts in their way, but they do things far differently. I think you really do need hand-on operators to like look at your business, than just sort of saying, hey, AI is going to solve everything.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, we've hit it. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned Pliny before. I, of course, think Pliny the Elder. How did Pliny the Elder die?
I have no idea.
We were talking, before the start, we were talking about Latin. I took a good bit of Latin in my life and a lot of Roman history. And my roommate from college is a fairly famous Roman ancient history professor. And so Pliny the Elder was a very interesting guy, was in the Roman army, navy, etc. Actually is credited with coining the phrase in a nutshell. But Pliny the Elder actually sailed off to see the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and sailed his ship basically a little too close and got caught in a pyroclastic flow and ended up dead on the beach. So that was the end of Pliny the Elder, but a great life lived. An interesting fellow. Everyone should read up on him.
I will. Everyone should read up on Pliny the Liberator, because I think he on Twitter, on X.
Yeah. No, I follow Pliny on X, which is good. But I think we went through, I think, 3 stories today. Obviously, the government pulled Fable off on last Friday, and by Sunday, China had basically replaced it with an equal or better model. A week later, the U.S. model, Fable 5, still in the drawer. And I think the important thing is that, if you read our writing, it's not like we want to take a victory lap on this stuff, but we've been beating this into
Yes.
people for a while, which is to say you should be thinking about where your data lives. You should be thinking about what models you use and making sure that all of your workflows, all of your skills, all of that live somewhere that you control, not that somebody else controls. And you should be thinking about where you're sending your inference, what level of intelligence you need, whether that's Haiku, as Anthony uses, or whether that's the most expensive model on earth, which is what a lot of people have been using. Because at the end of the day, we don't control all of these systems. And so you have to, I was in Mexico last week. I got caught in a terrible, terrible travel, 2 days coming back. It
So own
literally,
your plane.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it's exactly right. Get rid. I did say that at one point, which is, if anything motivates you to get rich enough to own your own plane, it's these 2 days, it's these 48 hours. But what I said was, because I was with my daughter and her boyfriend, and they were getting a little perturbed, and I was kind of just sitting there cool as a cucumber, despite all the havoc around me. And they said, "Well, why are you calm?" And I said, "Look, you control what you can control, and everything else is out of your control, and you just try to make sure that you can control more of your life." That's
Yeah.
really all you can do. And so I think it's the same in business. You control the things you can. So you can't really control inference. You can control a lot of inference. You can't control frontier model inference. You're just not going to be able to put that on your computer. The best of
And
the
you're not gonna be
best
able
of
to make it. You're not
no,
gonna
you're
be
not
able
going
to
to.
make it
No,
either. So
you can't.
yeah.
You
So
can't
you have
make
to
it,
use an
and
open source.
you have to use it. You have to use one of those models. But the open source models are damn good. And if you just want to do the vast, I would say 98% of what most people can want to do, they can do on an open source model. So you should really think about controlling that. As we sort of say, you got to stop renting. You got to start owning. You got to own your own future.
Yeah. Or at least have the mix. Have the mixture there. So
Yep.
yeah, I think this is
All
a
right.
good podcast. We hope we like, look, we're gonna be writing a bunch next week. We're still working on improving. We've updated our advisory website, which is the URL to that is outsiderlabs.xyz. And we are publishing almost daily, if not twice a day at getcoai.com. And we are, anyone that wants to reach out to us, we are still working on putting together a special sort of set of writing and presentations on how to get your kids, or what you should do with your kids. I know we have a lot of people are thinking about their kids, whether they're in high school or college, and we hope to have an answer for you. We're putting together a product that we're going to be offering our community. So stick with us, reach out to us on various social services. We're there, and have a great weekend.
Yeah. Have a great weekend. Good talking.